Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Esoteric and a continuing series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, and I got a fun and exciting bonus episode for you guys this evening because SRG320 released updates to the Sega Saturn core yesterday. That means we have a brand new core to test. It brings a lot of improvements, and a lot of games that were either working substantially but not quite perfectly or not at all are now working in this core. Before you get too far involved, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. But getting right into it, so many games are just working near to perfect now. This core is evolved so much over the previous months, and some games that were working on earlier cores but with bugs that stopped working on the latest cores are now back to working again. Something like Guardian Heroes here, the last couple of cores it would just freeze in the FMV. It is now running, and this is one of the most requested games I get to test. Big thanks to Andy D for helping me this week. This just looks, sounds, feels, and plays like the game if it was on real Sega Saturn hardware, and that is spectacular because a lot of games now that are working really do feel like if you did a blind taste test and you couldn't see the system it was running on, you might not be able to tell it was MiSTer and not Sega Saturn. Now that is not true for the entire core, it is limited to some games, but something like this game right here is just fundamentally exactly as I remember playing it. I do have this in my collection, I've completed it many times before, and watching this footage and seeing it run, if I didn't know this was running on the MiSTer, I'd have absolutely no idea it was running on FPGA, and that is what we want out of a core like this. It's so much fun to follow along with the updates and the progress, and seeing these games improve over time means we are getting closer to a completed core. Now again, you guys always ask me if I feel like this is near to complete. This still feels alpha because some games don't work whatsoever, and some games do have some bugs. We're happy with what works, and we wait to see improvements on next cores when they come. But if you plug in your Sega Saturn today and you start playing Guardian Heroes, you're really not going to be able to tell it's any different than real hardware, and that is so impressive because this is one of the best games on the Sega Saturn. It really shows off the 2D hardware, all of the scaling, and everything else that the Saturn could do in 2 dimensions. It's just one of those games that when you think of the Sega Saturn, you think of this right here with the inventory management system, with all of the different level ups and characters you can choose, the magic attacks. It is fundamentally one of the Saturn's best games, and right now on MiSTer FPGA it's running exactly as it should. All of the graphical effects are there, the sprites look clean, I don't see any bugs whatsoever, but leave me a comment down below and tell me if you notice anything that doesn't look right. And also tell me what your favorite Sega Saturn game is below, because this one's definitely up there for me, but I would always say Saturn Bomberman takes the cake. Now another game that was mentioned in SRG320's notes on the release is Thunder Force 5. This is another one of those super popular shmups on the Sega Saturn, and it's another game that I get constant requests to test, and I can say now it is running on the current core. Sometimes it does seem to freeze, but what is here is exactly as you would expect it to be until it is not, and that's kind of the situation with the current core. It works until it doesn't, but we're so happy to see what does work, we don't really worry about what doesn't. You know, it's just one of those games, it's such a classic, and I'm not surprised at all why people request this, but in gameplay it's smooth, it's fluid, it seems like it's running at the appropriate speed. Everything seems to just be kind of clicking until something like this happens. You'll get down below here and all of a sudden the game will freeze. A core reset brings it back up and you can get back into it, but there is going to be intermittent freezing. When it works, when it doesn't, it doesn't, and that's kind of where the current core is right now. Some games you can definitely finish from start to finish. I finished Saturn Bomberman, games such as that, but other games you might not be able to see the end of. At least now we do have saving involved though, so you can save your game and come back to it, which is a much bigger deal than you would think. Not being able to save the game made it harder to get further into games and test them. But the fluidity is there, the graphics are there, I don't really see anything that looks like a problem whatsoever. But again, if this is your favorite game, you will notice more than I will, so leave me that comment down below. Because that's the thing, the Saturn library is immense, and while I've played an absolute metric crap ton of the games, not every single game have I played recently, so my memory is not perfect. And again, if there's games you want to see tested in the next video, leave me a comment down below and tell me what it is you want to see tested next. But Thunder Force here didn't work on the previous couple cores. You could not get into the game, and now it is running, and hopefully with the next core update some of that freezing is diminished. Let's move on to another game that didn't used to work and now does, and that's going to be Virtual On. It's an absolutely awesome game, and this has got some of the best sound on the current batch of tests, so go ahead and listen to the music and sound effects for 45 seconds and I'll come back and show you even more games that work on the current Sega Saturn core. That sounds exactly as I remember it, and the sound effects do sound a little bit too loud, but I have the Sega Saturn version, I played it a bunch, and that's also something I encounter on real hardware. Sega had some audio balancing issues back in the day. It seems like they chose to make the sound effects louder than they should have been, especially on arcade games where the engine sounds of something like Daytona can and will overshadow the actual soundtrack. What's not overshadowed here though is the performance. This is just virtual on, or as good as it can be with a regular controller. Now this was released with twin stick controls as well, and I do have a set in my closet buried, so when we actually do get Saturn controls working, hopefully via a snack adapter on the core, I will definitely test those out and let you guys know if they work, because this is a game that is much better played with the twin stick versus a D-pad or even a single analog. It's how it was designed in the arcades, and Sega did make it compatible over here on the Sega Saturn. But as far as the performance is concerned, as far as the graphics, the sound, everything that makes virtual on, it just seems to be here as expected, and I absolutely love to see that. Even the attract mode, all of the models, all of the graphics, everything in the background, I do not see anything visually that would indicate that this core is doing anything other than a perfect job of running the game. Now going from pure 3D to pure 2D, let's take a look at Capcom Generations 2. This is all three of the Ghosts and Goblins or Dai Makimura games on one compilation, and last time I tested this, only one game would run out of the three, and that was the Super Nintendo version, but there is the arcade version as well as the Sega Genesis version on the disc, and last time we checked it out, only one of the three would work. There's a couple games on the Sega Saturn that are compilations, and that was also part of the Twin B package. One game would load, one game would freeze. The good thing is, at least on the example I'm showing you right now with the Super Nintendo, if there's anything different from my original disc, again, I cannot see whatsoever. It has slowdown in the exact same spots as the Super Nintendo cartridge would, and this was a game that slowed down a lot on real hardware. It slows down where I would expect it to on the Sega Saturn. That means this is working exactly as you would anticipate. I absolutely love this game. It is hard as nails, and if you've somehow never played it, you 100% owe it to yourself to do so. But it's another game, at least as far as this footage goes. Maybe it'll freeze in level 5, level 6. It takes a long time to get there because it is difficult, but right now it just does work. But I know that I've shown you the Super Nintendo version, that it is functioning. Let's move over to some of the other games on the disc, because there are three and last time only one worked. And it's really awesome to tell you that now all three of them do load up and play exactly as you would expect. The sound is good, the music is good, the controls are as good as they ever were, which is to say that the jump is definitely going to take some practice if you haven't played this game in a long time. But otherwise, all three games are playing exactly as they should if you used regular Saturn hardware. Sometimes it does seem like maybe this is running slightly too fast. Leave me a comment down below, but I have not played this version of the game in years. It's the one out of the three that I've never actually 100% cared for. But it's so nice to see that on these compilation discs, now all of a sudden everything is loading up versus just one of the three games. But let's move over to another game, one of the most famous on Sega Saturn. Everyone's been asking for it to be retested, so of course I want to make sure we get that, and that's going to be Nights into Dreams. Last time I showed you this, it barely had any soundtrack and the skybox was completely missing, and it is amazing to say that now the skybox is there, it's playing normally, and the soundtrack is pretty much perfect as well. So I'm going to give you guys a listen to that in just a second, but Nights is amazing. I'm so glad everyone keeps requesting this. I love talking about it, but the soundtrack's great. I'll be right back. Yeah, again, that just sounds like the Nights into Dreams I know, love, and remember. And when this game came out, I remember I got it with a Sega Saturn back in the day, and I fell in love with the game, and I still love it since. Of course, it's unfortunate we never got a true 3D Sonic game on the Saturn, but I feel like Nights into Dreams definitely covered us for a very inventive 3D game, showing that the Saturn could push polygons as well as the PlayStation 1 could when it was in the right developer's hands. But this is just a game that shows massive improvement compared to the last time we showed you. All of the graphics are intact, all of the music music is here, the skybox is there as well. This is just how I remember the game, at least for the first level, because once you get into the first boss battle, the soundtrack does start to drop out. We get sound effects, but the soundtrack just goes missing. So it's one of those things, again, the game works exactly as it should on real Saturn hardware until it doesn't. It must just be a different sound mode or a different implementation or bit of code that is not quite ready for prime time yet in the current core, but the sheer improvements on this game are just spectacular. Now, another game that everyone wanted to see retested, and last time we showed it had some bad freezing problems, was Dead or Alive. It is running much better now, but this is one instance in which the core seems to have some slowdown that not would have been there on the original Sega Saturn hardware. And that's totally fine, it's still a work in progress, and that doesn't mean it's not going to get to full speed, but it's a really good visual example of what the Saturn does when it starts to slow down in spots that wouldn't be with real hardware, so definitely look out for that. And if you do see interlacing, this was one of the games that used the Saturn's high resolution interlaced mode, so you are going to get those interlacing lines even with a DaVinci Resolve deinterlace in the background. You still get that aberration on the screen, but you'll see right there, there is that slowdown that I'm talking about. That is not on real hardware, so next time we get a core update, it'll be a fun game to retest to see if that slowdown has been improved, because it's something that isn't running like it would on original hardware. And again, this is a game that I have on the Sega Saturn, but in all honesty, if you want to play the best version of Dead or Alive, just play it on the Xbox. They remade this game, it is absolutely spectacular. Or you can use the Model 2 emulator to play the Model 2 arcade original. The Sega Saturn version is good, but don't worry about it right now, and if you really do want to play some Dead or Alive, just play the arcade version. Now let's take a look at Dragon Force 2. I get requested for this game all the time, especially from Adventure Taco. He asks me every single week if I'm going to show it. Now this was recorded on the previous core, but I did check before I put the footage up, and it is basically 1-to-1 identical, so I can say it should run as good on the August core. These games are the type of games, so many people love them, this really massive tactical RPG. It is definitely a genre. Now I do enjoy them, but it's one of those things, I try not to play too many of them because I absolutely get engrossed into it. But it's fun to see the Saturn hardware pushing an absolute metric crap ton of sprites on screen at once. Now a lot of times the soldiers and the enemies are the same sprite, so it does allow for easier memory usage. If they were all different, it would be a lot more to load into RAM at once. But it's a good example of having a lot on screen at once. There are some slight 2D and 3D elements here, a little bit of a mix of both, but it's mostly sprites, and it is using VDP to kind of show that infinite plane on the floor. But you get sprite scaling, you get movement of the camera, you get all of these different individual sprites on screen at once, and it's all running at basically full speed. But leave me a comment down below and tell me if you enjoy this genre or don't, because I always seem like when I talk about these sort of things, it is a love it or hate it sort of situation. I'm curious to know what games you really enjoy watching and playing, and which games you're not as big of a fan of. And again, if you have any requests for future testing, leave them down below. I love hearing your guys' ideas and making sure you get to see what you want to see. And speaking of games that everyone seems to want to see, and we check pretty much every core, that is going to be Soul Divide. It's an absolutely spectacular shmup from Psycho that a lot of people love to see on the channel, and it's one of those games that if you play shmups, you absolutely probably love it. It is working. The graphics are so much better than the previous core. Last time there was some corruption in the sprites. Now I don't really see much of anything whatsoever, but again, it's got some perfect Saturn sound. Listen for like 30 seconds, I'll come back and show you even more games that just work. Sounds really good to my ear, but you tell me down below. But this game is so much fun to test because it's gone through so many different changes with the cores. It didn't work for the longest time, then it worked with some freezing issues and some sprite corruption issues. It went back to not working and then started working again with less sprite corruption, but it was still there. And now if there's anything that doesn't look correct, I'm really not sure. There might be a little bit of weirdness with the skeletons there as they animate. I feel like I see a couple pixels that are a little bit out of place, but otherwise if I didn't point it out to you, you probably wouldn't notice whatsoever. ever. And we will continue to test this game because I know everyone loves seeing it, and it's a good example of how the core is currently doing. This is a game that didn't work for the longest time, and now outside of a couple stray pixels, if you didn't tell me this was MiSTer, I probably wouldn't notice. Now onto the Jank Game Showcase. Good news, everybody. The best game on the Sega Saturn works, and that is Death Crimson. You would not know what was broken on this game versus what was not working on the core, because this game is just absolutely broken all of the time. It is near impossible to play, and it's widely considered to be the worst Sega Saturn game of all time, which is why I 100% had to show it to you guys in this video. No one's ever asked for it, nobody ever will. Nobody should play this game, but it is hilarious just how bad it is, but it's also working really well on the core. Like I said, you would never be able to tell because it looks like it's completely broken, but that's not the FPGA's fault, that is the developer's fault, because this game feels like it's held together with wood screws and dreams. But that's the current situation on the Sega Saturn core. We have a brand new core you can test today. It's over on the MiSTer Discord. You can pick it up there. And of course, in a couple of weeks, we'll probably be testing some more Sega Saturn games because you love to see what is working. And the library for the Saturn is so immense and so filled with hidden gems. We could talk about this for a whole nother year. But tell me down below what game you want to see tested next. If you need any help setting up the core, leave me a comment. I'm happy to do it. I'll have more videos throughout the week, some more bonus episodes, but the Sega Saturn core is shaping up excellently. Bye-bye.